Welcome to Griffin Park for the second edition of 2016-17's Terrace Talk. Now, this week we are playing Sheffield Wednesday, sadly on a Saturday, so I can't come up with an extremely terrible pun. But what we're going to do today is ask the fans what their favourite Brentford player in a certain position is, and we're going to create with the fans today an all-time top 11 based on everybody's suggestions. And I'm going to start this week breaking the trend, and I'm going to start with Paul Smith as our goalkeeper. Now, Paul Smith was an absolutely fantastic goalkeeper. He did leave us to go to Southampton, and he was talented to go forward, but he did go to Southend, and that's where he currently is now as a player coach, where Dan Bentley, our current number one, is from. So, what is everybody going to say about their best 11? Mark Burridge, Voice of Peace player. Who is your favourite midfield player at Brentford of all time?
Of all time, I loved Andy Sinton, love Alan Judge obviously, but probably the best midfield player I've ever seen play for Brentford is without doubt Alex Pritchard.
Now, why is that? What makes you think that?
Just the skills, his confidence, the way he could take on players, the way he would get out of cul-de-sacs. He did things I haven't seen a Brentford player do for years and years. Just brilliant. I wish he was back here now.
There we go. Nice and easy, thank you. Billy Reeves, we're here with you. You're about to go onto the radio, BBC Radio London. Now, before you do that, I'd like to ask you who your favourite central defender at Brentford of all time is and why.
Someone of my generation, you'd think it would be the 70s or the 80s, but just wheedling his way into my heart is Harley Dean. I think a lot of people have written him off over the years. In the modern game, you don't get people staying at a club for that long. I adore Harley Dean. He's Brentford through and through. We helped develop his career. He's a beautiful man, and he's a good old-fashioned centre-half. So, yeah, I think it's Harley Dean.
OK, well, what would your choice have been if it had been in the 70s or 80s, just out of curiosity?
Terry Evans, I think. If you remember those great sort of like muddy pitches of that period of people bundling players over, that's what you wanted from a sort of like a big barrel-chested centre-half, and Dean reminds me of that.
So, I'm going to ask you two very serious questions, but first of all, what are your names?
Tommy.
So you've got Tommy and?
Jack.
Jack, right. So, Jack, first of all, who is your favourite striker that you've ever seen at Brentford?
Probably Scott Hogan.
Yeah? Why is that?
Because he just nets in a lot more goals that I've seen. Yeah.
Like Scott Hogan. Now, you're wearing a certain match-worn shirt of a certain player, so I'm going to ask you this. Who's your favourite midfielder at Brentford?
I like Woods.
Oh, OK, Brian Woods.
I also like Saunders there.
As well. So if we said centre midfielder, Brian Woods?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Just like him. I think he's a good player.
Yeah. Like him as he bombs it through like the Ginger Perlo?
Yeah. Ginger Ninja.
Tell us your name.
Dave Lewis.
Dave Lewis. Now, most important question.
Sorry. All the way from Sydney.
You've come all the way from Sydney?
Of course, yeah. Yeah. Just
What?
born in Isleworth, come from Sydney for this game.
And so how long's the trip taken you to get here?
30 hours.
30 hours. So you've come all the way here for what? Is it a short holiday or is it just the game?
Just the weekend. And off on Monday to the US. But came by here for the game today.
Wow. So you must have seen a lot of football. Being born in Isleworth, you must have seen a lot of football here over the years.
Of course, yeah.
And what made you come over?
Because I love it. 1976, first game, Watford away, Ealing Road, fantastic.
So you've come all the way from Sydney, and now this is the most important question you're going to be asked of your whole trip. Before you go to the US, who's your favourite left midfielder of Brentford of all time?
Andy Sinton.
Now, why is that?
He was awesome. Until he went to QPR, then he was rubbish.
I'd like to ask you who your favourite right midfielder at Brentford of all time has been.
My favourite right midfielder of all time, there are so many for somebody of my age that go back. When I first came down here, it was Terry Johnson. Used to play on the wing. As a 7-year-old, 8-year-old, I used to love watching him go lay down the wing. Of course, Neil Smiley. He used to play on the left wing, but he could play on the right wing and cut in. But I think for a little magic and a little bit of stardust, you can't go past our little Spanish friend of 12 months ago, Jota, cutting in from the right wing in the 89th minute and burying a shot against the Fulham. So he's my favourite.
Who is your favourite striker at Brentford ever?
ever. It's got to be Sir Bob Taylor. I mean, that man was an absolute genius. Signed him, I think it was about 1995, I think it was, and I think he made his debut against Cambridge. I think most of the fans were looking at him thinking, oh no, who've we got here? Lazy and all that, but you know, you just can't forget the quality of goals that he scored. Obviously his work rate wasn't there, but the guy was just sheer genius. Absolute beautiful player.
All-time favourite Brentford centre-half ever?
Terry Evans,
Now, why is that?
because he scored loads of goals and he was a great defender.
Who is your favourite Brentford right-back of all time?
That guy he
Moses.
Moses. He left a few years ago, didn't he? Or season.
Where did he go?
Yeah, that's a good question.
But
he was really good down the right. Excellent player.
Yeah, we had a solid back four then.
And he was good at crossing, wasn't he? He was good at crossing, and he got up and down that right flank. He really did a good job. Excellent job. And he's tackling. Yeah, his tackling, his defensive play was pretty good. But I think it was his attacking flair that really counted.
Some of the
and that was
moves he made through into the midfield were amazing, I must say.
So, we're outside the Princess Royal just before the game, and I'd like to ask you a very, very good question. Who is your favourite left-back at Brentford of all time?
Of all time, it's got to be Jake Bidwell. Yeah, lovely. Yeah, good player. Loved him to bits. Sad he's gone, but yeah, he's my all great timer.
So, what's your name?
Andy Langridge.
Now, I love your waistcoat. It's absolutely amazing. I really want one. Where'd you get it?
My wife made it for me.
That's fantastic. Have you been a Brentford fan all your life?
Since 1958, yeah.
Fantastic. Now, I'm guaranteed you're going to have seen a lot of Brentford players here over the years. Now, tell us who your favourite player of all time is and why.
Well, as I said, Johnny Brooks, because he was such a skillful player with a good football brain. He could pick out things that other players would never be able to pick up. The only player I could probably compare him with would be Stan Bowles.
And he played an old-fashioned position, didn't he?
Yeah, it was an inside right. It was in the days when we had 2 full-backs, 3 half-backs and 5 forwards. Very different from today's game. It was very much a more attacking and open game in those days. For an old man, like most old men would say, much more entertaining in those days.
And this is Harley Dean's 100th appearance at Griffin Park, and I think I've seen them all. Oh, come on, you love him. He's like a bulldog, isn't he? A little puppy, you love him.